This is April and Red. Welcome to our off-grid home build. In this video, Red will be framing and putting up more wall panels. We will also be pouring our last section of concrete.
Continuing work here on the southern wall of the house. This is the wall that has all the big windows in it that'll let in lots of light. And so I've already got one panel up and getting ready for the next panel to start fabbing it and getting it in place. One of the first things I always have to do is to prep the foundation to receive the wall panel, and I do that by drilling the bolts in it and doing this layering. The process of putting in these anchor bolts is something that I typically dread. I've had to do it in other projects that I've done, and I've always really dreaded the process because it's been really difficult to drill into the concrete. And previously I've had this old Craftsman drill that I used for a good many years, and it was purpose-built hammer drill, and it was a big heavy-duty drill. And so I just always thought that this is as good as it got, but man, I always struggled. It took a long time to drill into the concrete, and I would wear out drill bits, masonry drill bits. I would only get a couple of holes per masonry drill bit, and it would take so long that the Craftsman drill would start to overheat, and it was just a miserable process. So that's something about this project that I was really dreading. When I first started on the other wall, I was using that Craftsman drill, and it finally just died. And so I was like, oh no, my drill died. But I did have another, and it was a cordless DeWalt hammer drill. And because it was cordless, I just didn't think it would do very good. But hey, my other one died. I didn't have anything else. So I thought, well, I'll give the DeWalt a try. And man, that DeWalt mows through this concrete. It's amazing. It's only taking a couple minutes or less to drill each hole. I'm getting 10 plus holes per drill bit. It's a night and day difference. So it's made the process of installing these anchor bolts much more pleasant. I never knew. I've had this tool for quite a while, and I just never used it because I thought I had a better tool. So this was a learning experience. Some of the modern cordless hammer drills are quite good, and there's a huge difference in how well they function. Anyway, got all those in and got all my layers put up and prepped and in place. You got the 2 foam layers and the metal layer. Had April help me with those, and then she helped me get this next panel up. This is the panel right before our big glass sliding door. April helped me get the wall level, and we got the supports in place to hold it securely. And the location of the studs in each panel is dramatically different because there's so many windows and all the doors and everything in this wall. It's a fairly complicated wall. And so I have all that drawn out on my drawings that I did earlier on rainy days. And so I have nice drawings that lay all that out, but there's a lot of kind of careful marking out. I do that on the sill plate and the top rail. I kind of get those to length, and then I put those together on my stand, and then I carefully mark out where each stud's going to go and kind of double check all my measurements. And then I just get all my studs cut to length, separate the boards, and lay it all out and nail it together. As you can see here, while I'm working, April is doing the prep for the last section of concrete that we have to pour. She's putting in all the layers and getting that all ready to go. And here, April's giving me a hand getting this up and in place. You can see the gap there for the back door. Actually, that'll be the front door of the house. And we're getting this wall up and level, secured, and then I'll just put a top rail across, span the gap between the 2 panels, and I'll finish roughing that in later. So the wall is up, and I'm getting ready to put that board in to kind of span the gap between the 2 panels. To get the panels placed exactly the right width apart, I actually cut the board that I was going to use for the top and placed it down below, so I was able to slide the panel right up against it and get that gap exactly the right width, and then I just took that board out and put it in up top. I'm starting to work here on the last panel for the southern wall, and so I'm getting the top rail and the sill plate kind of laid out and get everything marked. And you can see I've got them laid out here, but then I realized I needed some more of the flashing for the sill plate. So the flashing, we've been using some material that we already had that was left over from a roof replacement that we did on a previous house, and we've been carrying this stuff around for a while and finally found a use for it. So this is 20-inch wide flashing that I'm cutting into 2 8-inch strips, and then I have an extra piece that's 4 inches left in the middle, but it's just a good use of this flashing. We don't have to buy new. It's always good to use stuff we already have. The tool that I'm using for this is I'm not sure exactly what they call it. It's a cutter that has a little jaw that goes up and down and cuts the flashing or any kind of metal, and it leaves a little ribbon of metal once it's done cutting. It cuts really fast. It's been super nice. I've had it for years and used it a bunch. Every time I do metalworking, I bring this old tool out and use it, and it's been wonderful. The only thing it's not good for is cutting over the ridges when you're going across, like a pro panel piece of metal. And there's actually a different tool that they make for that I've actually acquired and will be using for the first time on this project. So I'm really excited about that. Always nice when you get to buy new tools. So I've about got this one put together. I'm just nailing it together, and we're just about ready to stand it up. As you can see here, I don't do the rough framing for the windows and doors. I just kind of get the 2x4s that are going to be on either side in the correct place. And then I like to come back later after the wall is already stood up to do the rough-in work for the windows, to do the header, and then all the rough-in around the header and below the window. The reason I do that is because it makes these wall panels a lot lighter for two people to handle and put up. As it is, this one is 14 feet long and about 10 foot tall. So this is all April and I wanted. It was quite heavy. It was manageable, but if I would have put, the big header over the window and all the other framing in, it would have been a lot heavier. And I find it just as easy to do, while the wall is standing up and in place. It's actually a little easier for me because I make sure that it's all up and level and square before I do that rough-in framing around the window, and then everything that I do for that is also square and true. So I like doing it that way. I know some people will build the wall panel completely before they stand it up and kind of be done, but this is the way I do it. Moving on to the sidewalls here, and I'm starting to select the lumber that I'll use for the sidewalls. It's always a bit of a process trying to get some good straight boards. The only bad thing about having lumber delivered is that they don't take great care in selecting straight boards. When I go to the lumber store myself, I spend a lot of time making sure that every board I buy is straight. And when you get it ordered, you just get the pallet, the bundle, whatever comes in, and so you get a lot of crooked boards or warped boards. In fact, I would say probably 50% are warped and not straight enough to use in the wall. And so it's quite a selection process to get the good straight ones to use in the wall. Now, I have found other uses for the ones that are bent but not too bad, or twisted but not too bad. Those actually work fine for doing in the rough-in work around windows and doors where you're cutting smaller pieces. And so I'm actually able to use most of the lumber that they give me, but I still have to go through and spend a good deal of time, finding those good straight ones to use on the side here. I had to think for quite a while about how I wanted to do the sidewalls. So I decided not to do these walls where I built it and then stood it up because it's sloped. The top rail is going to be following the pitch of the roof, which is basically 1 inch per 12-inch rise. And so I decided to go ahead and kind of build it in place. And so as you can see here, I'm putting the sill plate down first, and I'm actually getting it bolted in all the way across. I've got all my layers in, and I'm bolting the sill plate down, and then I'm going to build the rest of the wall in place instead of trying to stand it up.
So today is January 4th. A nice day out here, just a little bit of a breeze, but not too bad. We're finally getting around to pouring the last section of concrete. Red's been working on the framing. He has 2 walls up. So we got down to 13 degrees a couple of nights ago, but as long as it's clear and sunny, it warms up pretty quick, and it's nice it hasn't been so windy.
The next day we got some good weather, and we decided to go ahead and pour the concrete in the last section. So this will be kind of the entryway area of the house is where this last section is. It'll be one of the smaller pours. We've been wanting to do this for a good while, but the holidays came, we had company, and then we had quite a bit of bad weather, so it's taken us a while, but we're finally getting around to doing this, and we're really looking forward to having this section done because that'll kind of mark the last of the big concrete pours for the place. The rest of the interior floors will be earthen floors. Our daughter's here helping us this morning. It's always nice to have 3 people working on it. It makes it a lot easier. We did run out of the 3/4-inch gravel, or we're running out. We're kind of having to scrape it off the ground and kind of get what's left. And then we did have the other gravel that we brought down from my daughter's place. That is the really fine gravel. It's like 1/2 inch or finer, 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch gravel. And what we found is that really makes really weird concrete. It's really hard to mix. You need to kind of use more water than you really should use. And so anyway, we found that it's kind of difficult to work using that really fine gravel. And so what we tried to do is use kind of a half a bucket full of the coarser gravel that we were able to scrape off the ground, and then some of the finer gravel that we brought down from my daughter's place. And that worked decent. But this whole pour was I would say a bit more challenging than normal. It was just a little bit harder to work with the kind of weird gravel that we're using. We're using the same mix here as we have been in the past, and also adding the fibers like we were. I guess the biggest trouble that I had with this kind of finer gravel was getting it out of the barrel. I made it as dry as I could, but I still had to scrape it out of the mixer. Like every time, get my hand in there and scrape almost all of it out. It just wouldn't pour out. Tried to get as dry as I could, but it was still a little wetter than we would have liked. The next day I was able to resume working on that sidewall. I'd got this bottom rail down, and so the next thing to do was to make the top rail. Like I say, I kind of went back and forth on exactly what would be the best way to do this, and I ended up deciding to put in the bottom rail and then put up the top rail, attach it at both ends, and then support it in the middle with a couple boards that were cut to length, and then just measure and piece in each board thereafter, just by taking measurements and figuring it out. So that was kind of my goal here, and so kind of figured out the hypotenuse of the triangle, figured out how long we needed to make that top rail, made it to length, attached it on both ends, and supported it with a couple boards in the middle there. The top rail was sagging, and so those boards were kind of holding it up and keeping it straight. At one point, one of those boards actually fell over before I got them both attached or screwed in at the top, and it fell over, and wouldn't you know it, it fell right onto the outlet box that's right next to my electrical box there. It knocked the covers off of both of the outlets and damaged one of the cords, so it wasn't catastrophic, but a bit of a setback. Once I had the top rail up and kind of level or straight at least on top, then it was just a matter of, piecing in the boards in the appropriate places along both sides, which ended up being quite a few boards. And it did end up being a little more complicated than I thought. I had first imagined myself measuring down from the top rail to the bottom rail and just cutting a piece that was that size, but it was more complicated than that. And it's just really difficult to get those kind of measurements. I ended up using math and figuring out the rise over run and the spacing every 16 inches to make the next board this much longer. Sometimes it wasn't that much of a distance between. Sometimes it was only a few inches or 10 inches or whatever between studs. And so anyway, I had to get out a calculator and go along and figure out exactly how long each board needed to be, and then I wrote it on the bottom sill and then cut each board. That all actually worked out good and turned out to have a nice straight rail on top. I'm finally starting on the last exterior wall of the house, so that's exciting. So this is the east side, and so it's another sidewall, and so since I kind of figured out how I'm doing all the slope and the angles and stuff, I can just kind of copy what I did last time and build this wall the same way. The only thing about this wall that's going to be more complicated than the last sidewall I did is this section of the footer has a pretty good sag in it. So it's got about a 3/4 to 1.25 inch sag in the middle. I'm trying to adjust for that as I build the wall so that my angle or the top rail is straight. And so take that sag out as I build it by making the studs all different lengths. That was how I decided to go about it. But the first step was to go ahead and put this bottom sill plate on to get it actually bolted in place and get all the markings on the sill plate where all the studs will go for the windows and everything. So that's all kind of laid out and marked on the sill plate. The sill plate's in place, and then the next thing will be to put the top rail up and then fill it in with the studs. Here I am cutting the termite shield to fit around the bolts that I've already kind of got pounded into the concrete here. I'm not sure if I'm doing this the best way. I would imagine the professionals have an easier way to do this. I kind of struggle with this every time I had to do it, kind of trying to hold the tin up to it and then cutting out a slot so that I could slide it in around the bolt. And it's a struggle, but I got through it, and this is the last wall, so I'm about done. But it did occur to me that there's probably a better way to do this. But my style of working is just to kind of figure it out for myself and then just do it and get it done. I don't spend a lot of time deliberating. I don't enjoy researching stuff on the internet. And of course, I'm old enough that I was raised before the internet. And, when you're out working on a site, you could either call somebody that may know more than you or you figured it out. So I've just kind of always figured out stuff and got it done, even if it wasn't necessarily the right way. And so I still kind of do that. I have learned to research a little bit more, but like I say, I just don't particularly enjoy it. I prefer thinking through problems and figuring out my own way. The construction of these sidewalls are kind of a good case in point of my perhaps not the best style of construction, of figuring things out for myself. Instead of looking online to figure out how people normally build sidewalls when you have a slope, I just started figuring out how to do it. And in fact, here you can see that I'm struggling a bit. So I complicated, trying to figure out how to get the marks for the studs in the right places. It's easy on the base plate, the sill plate, because it's level. But you try to get those marks for the studs on the top plate, which is at an angle, is a little more differently, because you have to adjust each one of them a fraction of an inch in the right direction so that it's not at a slight angle due to the slope of that upper beam. And that upper beam is a little bit longer than the lower beam because it's at an angle. So anyway, I was struggling a bit here. I'll admit I had to go back and measure 3 or 4 times, and it took me a little bit, but eventually I did get it figured out the way that I needed to shift the location of each stud. It was about 1/16 of an inch in one direction, actually towards the high side of the structure. And if I did that, then it worked out good in the end. So it took me a little bit of doing here. Well, I'm almost done with the exterior framing of the house, but this video is getting a little long, so we'll finish it up next time. I'll also be doing the rough-in framing for the windows and doors on 3 sides of the house, putting in the top rail, and who knows, maybe even getting started on the trusses.
Thanks so much for watching. Please join us again next time.